Did the government shutdown set us back? Are you expecting a big hit to fourth quarter GDP as a result of the 43-day shutdown, Treasury Secretary?
Maria, of course the government shutdown set us back. And look, it's terrible what the Democrats have done. And we've got a 60-day reprieve here. And if they shut the government down again and refuse to negotiate, I'm 100% with the president. The Senate should go straight and forget the filibuster, and Republicans should vote to fund the government without the Democrats.
Wow.
I'm very happy to see 8 brave Democrats came across, but this economic damage is unacceptable.
Yep.
They call it self-harm. They were willing to harm the economy of the United States to benefit a party in chaos.
And that's the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, with me yesterday on Sunday Morning Futures on the 43-day government shutdown, setting the economy back. He's warning Democrats if they refuse to negotiate again, Republicans should vote to fund the government without them, as the Trump administration is pushing for a lower cost of living. They're rolling back tariffs on more than 200 grocery staples, including beef and coffee. Joining me now is Montana Congressman Troy Downing, a member of the House Financial Services Committee. Congressman, your thoughts on what the Secretary told us yesterday and the administration's efforts to rein in costs.
Well,
he said this will be felt by Americans by the first or second quarter next year.
Right. Maria, good morning. Thanks for having me on. Yes, I think that the Secretary was on point on a lot of that. Obviously, this last 43 days has been horrible for the American people, horrible for this country. And the sad part about it, it was 100% about politics. It was not about policy. It was not about actually getting anything done. It was, as many of the Democrats said, they saw that as their one wedge, their one way of getting something, through without actually going through regular order. They tried to hold the American people hostage. And I too am very happy that we had those Democrats that were brave enough to say this is just not right. Let's reopen the government. My concern, as the Secretary said, is that we have, version 2 of this at the end of January. I assume that 90% of this is going to be fairly easy, getting these appropriations bills through, but that last 10% may be the hard part. We need to really think hard and strong what we do if we can't get to consensus and actually get these things passed with 60 votes in the Senate. I think the one...
Yeah, go ahead. What do you do?
Well, I think that the one hard one, the one big topic that the Democrats have already brought up is the Affordable Care Act, and as we've seen, it's collapsing under its own weight. It needs reform. We need to have these decisions, but I think that the Republicans are not willing to simply write a blank check from the federal government to hide the fact that it's failing.
Mm-hmm. Well, the relief on beef products is a real focus now, coming as prices hit new record highs. I want to get your take on this because we spoke with the CEO of Omaha Steaks last week. Nate Rempe was on this program on Friday, and he said that these costs are likely to keep on climbing. Listen to this.
So we are headed for what I'm calling, Maria, the $10 a pound reality. By third quarter of 26, families are going to see $10 a pound ground beef in the grocery store. So we're in for a bit of a haul here. I don't believe we'll see price come down in any meaningful way until sometime in 2027.
Wow. Walk us through the issue here. I know this has a lot more to do with the actual supply of cattle. You visited Montana ranchers to advocate for U.S. beef producers. Your thoughts on $10 a pound beef by the third quarter of next year?
Yeah, obviously, we've got a real problem with prices at the grocery store. The president's concerned about that. We're all concerned about that because at the end of the day, that is a quality of life. That's families just trying to put food on the table. And one of my concerns coming from a beef-producing state is that we get beef prices high enough that folks start looking for alternative proteins, which would be bad for my district. But one of the issues that got us here is we've just seen a dwindling size of the herd in the United States. We've seen that start to shrink back for a number of reasons. In Montana, it went from about 2.5 million head around COVID to about 2.1 million head. And we've seen a lot of shrinking of the herd in the Southwest due to drought and a bunch of other factors. And so the long term, we need to start regrowing the herd. herd. We need to really be focused on regrowing that American herd. And I know that the president is looking at bringing in more Argentine beef to supplement some of this. I know he's looking at reducing tariffs and beef. And I think these are short-term fixes to try to get to the real goal of how do we regrow the American herd? How do we make sure that our farmers and ranchers are doing what they can do to be successful? Because we don't want to disadvantage them, but we need to be very careful that we don't get to, $10 or greater ground beef, because at that point, families on budgets are going to stop buying beef and they're going to look for an alternative protein, and it's going to be really difficult for the industry to crawl back from that. So we're looking at this very, very closely.
Well, what about what the president is proposing, these $2,000 dividend checks for Americans funded by the revenue brought in by tariffs? Now, the Treasury Secretary told me yesterday that this plan, the president's plan, will require new legislation and Congress's approval. Does the president need congressional approval to send $2,000 checks to Americans, even if it's the revenue from the tariffs?
I believe so. And, this is there's two sides to this, because on one hand, the president has talked about short-term pain, and obviously we've seen prices in short-term pain that we want to make sure that we're addressing, because, these are real Americans, real families that are experiencing this pain. On the other hand, I want to be really careful that the money that we're bringing in from these tariffs, that the lion's share of that is being used to pay down the national debt. And then if we are starting to make payments from this, that we're very thoughtful on how that happens, to make sure that we don't have yet another inflationary data point there, that we're not causing further inflation by putting more money into the system. So it's a fine line there, and I don't disagree with the president here, but I think we need to be very thoughtful in how we approach this.
All right, we will be watching all of that. Congressman, it's good to see you this morning. Thank you, sir.
Great to see you.
Troy
Thank
Downing
you.
joining us. All right, we will keep watching all of that.